Alright, good morning, everybody. A friend of mine last night sent me a video, a blog post, from a very provocative blog. I've known about this blog for some time. I've always, had my issues with it. It's an anti-Haredi, pro-Zionist blog. And on the blog post, they had a story about a girl from a prominent rabbinical family who attended some of the best Hasidic schools, who apparently shmaded, was baptized, converted to Christianity. And in the video, she states her name with her Yiddish name, last name from a very prominent family, and the pastor there baptized her, full water baptism, and that's the story. Interestingly, one of the Rebbis from that family, there's a story that I heard a few times that he, for some reason, he found himself in a hotel somewhere in the south, and he figured in every town there's at least one Jew, a doctor, a lawyer, or something. He'll look up the name that sounds like a Jewish name. He finds someone, say Goldberg, and so he tries calling them. There's no answers. He's like, it's Motzei Shabbos. He's like before Shabbos, and then Motzei Shabbos still. He's like, maybe he'll go, sit and talk with the Eid, like in this small town, give him some chizik, make havdalah or something, So he arrives at Goldberg's house, and it turns out, the person definitely wasn't Jewish, and when they saw this Rebbe with the Rebbishe and the Streimel and the beard and payas and everything, they were like, they fainted dead over. They said, for all the places for him to come back, the second coming, he should come right to my house. And the woman fainted dead away. Not dead, but it's an expression. So the blogger who posted this said, look, this community, this school that this girl went to, anti-Zionist, and this is what it leads to. Now, first of all, this girl, she was involved with Naftali Muster. She's part of the Yafet movement. That was where the issue came from, not from the anti-Zionism of the Satmar community, but from Muster and so forth. But that being said, it's an improvement over Muster. I'll be 100% honest. And base that on traditional sources. The Rav Yaakov Emden writes, there's a letter that he writes in general to the Christian community, talking about how Christianity successfully spread Torah more than any other movement in the world, and warning Christians not to be fooled by the false Messiah of Shabtai Tzvi, Machshemai V'Zichrei, who was a destructive force in the world. And the fact of the matter still is, if you really study history and make all the connections, most of the ills in modern society can be linked directly to either Shabtai Tzvi or his imitator Jacob Frank. A great deal of the families of prominent quote-unquote Jewish or Jewish leftists and so forth, who had tremendous influence in society, were all Frankists. Or either Frankists or Sabbateans. And the roots of all of these movements communism, socialism, Zionism, reform. They can all be linked to the Sabbateans. Just trying to pass this bus, but now it's no passing zone. A lot of traffic. What's today? There's so much traffic on the 17B. And like we said, the Rav Yaakov Emden, the Yavitz himself, said that Christianity is a much more positive force in the world and can fight this negative Sabbatean cult that has really brought horrible destruction to the world. In a sense, since Nazism is a form of socialism, Nazism really can be linked to Shabtai Tzvi. Many of the aspects of the progressive movement in America can be linked to Shabtai Tzvi. Look at people like Brandeis and others who brought so much negative change to America through judicial review and things that in a way that the founders never intended. All of these destructive forces can be linked to Sabbateans and Frankists. And that was their goal. They believed that would actually bring a messianic redemption to the world. But their form of messianism is pure evil. Because it's iconoclastic in the sense of how Shabtai Tzvi himself, he would, and the Frankists even more, they would go out of their way to commit sins as a religious devotion, and so to the Reform movement, unwittingly, that's what their leaders led them to. There's stories about Stephen Wise, who was one of the leading Reform rabbis, that reciting Psalms while committing adultery. He was clearly a Sabbatean or a Frankist. More likely, that's more of a Frankist approach. And these are, the blind. It's not even the blind leading the blind. This man, Wise, Stephen Wise, Yimach Shemo, knew exactly what he was doing, and in trying to destroy Judaism and trying to destroy Western civilization. And so too these movements, people today like George Soros, people are like, well, how can you say he's a Nazi and this and that? No, it goes completely in line with the Sabbatean ideology. Same thing, how can you say the Zionists or Nazi sympathizers and collaborators? Again, it's 100% in line with the satanic roots of their cult. And all of these things have clear historical connections. So all of this being said, let's go back to, and again, just because these people used our holy books as a means of justifying their ideology does not mean that it in some way impugns our holy books. All it does is that it impugns them for desecrating and disrespecting our holy books. But it's clear a Gemara in Sanhedrin that says, that an atheist is worse than an idolater. And furthermore, there can be a lot of discussion from the Meiri, from other sources. Do we consider Christianity idolatry? Clearly, it's forbidden for a Jew to engage in Christianity. Most likely, a Gentile under the laws of Noah is totally clean and good under Christianity, and really doesn't need to do anything else. and they're already, they can actually find what they would term salvation through their faith. And like we've quoted before in Malachi chapter 1 verse 11, Malachi points out that from the rising of the sun to the setting thereof, great is my name among the nations, says the Lord of hosts. Every place where they're offering an offering, it's a pure offering, mincha tahora, ki gadol shmi b'goyim, because great is my name among the nations. And that was in the time when everyone was pagans. And yet, there was no Christianity, there was no Islam. There wasn't this general monotheism that has spread throughout the world. And as the Ivitz points out, these central ideas of Judaism have been spread throughout the world through the other two major Abrahamic faiths. All of that doesn't mean that it supersedes the covenant that we have as Jews. All it means is that, in a certain sense, just we haven't done our job fully. We're supposed to be a light unto the nations. It's why we were put into exile. Unfortunately, through much of history, a lot of even those religions, and that's something we could discuss here, were preventing us from spreading our faith and so forth. But that being said, still, they essentially were doing our job for us. 63A. Goodness, so I have 10 blocks left before I finish Shas. And in a certain sense, one of the major outgrowths of the Sabbatean movement, one of the unfortunately most successful outgrowths of Zionism, is doing exactly the opposite. And taking on, I've been reading on and off, not straight through, but I found in the library in the institution where I work, Karen Armstrong's book, The War for God, in which she discusses issues of fundamentalism in the modern world, and showing how fundamentalism is essentially a modern movement. It's not some throwback to ancient or medieval ways, but it's something that's totally modern and new. And in her discussions, she mentions various Jewish movements quite accurately. But certain things, but I think she fails to recognize, although I didn't read the whole book, and I think she mentions to a certain extent, is that there is just as much secular fundamentalism as there is religious fundamentalism. In a certain sense, the religious fundamentalism is a reaction to the secular fundamentalism. And then we have to ask, what is fundamentalism? Is fundamentalism always bad? Can it be good? What exactly is going on? And there are many different expressions of it and so forth. I mean, if you have a peaceful form of fundamentalism, is that really bad? The question is it really fundamentalist? If someone just simply withdraws from the world, without and doesn't hurt anybody else, and doesn't even hate anybody else, except those who attack them, perhaps. And even them, they don't really hate, they just wish they would stop attacking them, and they're just on the defense. Is that truly fundamentalism? how do we, is it a problem? Excuse me. Karen Armstrong notes quite eloquently that to Satmarov, the kibbutzim were as bad, if not worse, than the concentration camps. And I know a lot of people find that offensive. It's certain, but I think that's a true. I mean, she noted that the kibbutzim were earlier, and that's how the Satmarov's approach was, and I would consider that to be accurate. Yes, it's worse. Why? Because the Nazis killed our bodies, and Herzl and his people killed our souls. And Samarov said, in a bit of hyperbole, that it's better to bow 100 times a day to a crucifix than to learn modern Hebrew for 1 minute. Now, certain people say, how can you say that? But the fact of the matter is, and so this particular blogger obviously disagrees with that and says, Satmar, they have to abandon their anti-Zionism because their anti-Zionism is what is causing this one girl and maybe a dozen others or so to shmad. And it's patently not true. None of these girls are saying we are shmadding because Satmar Rebbe said that it's better to shmad than to be a Zionist. These are all rebels who are rebelling against the faith which they were brought up with. It's a free country. There's nothing really wrong with that. And to me, personally, my feeling is that of course, I don't have any control over how these people live their lives, but if you want to ask me, which is the bigger tragedy? For someone to get baptized or for someone to be an atheist? Obviously, it's a bigger tragedy that they're an atheist. This guy he's writing, it's not just they're going off the derech, they're adopting a faith of people who murdered our grandparents. Now, first of all, they're not. Because all of the churches have made amends for this, for their histories of anti-Semitism. It's not the old-fashioned way. The Inquisition isn't out to get us anymore. And this is part of Zionist propaganda, to be constantly harping on anti-Semitism. The fact of the matter is, since 1948, as far as I can find, 0 Jews have been killed in the name of Jesus. But since 1948, some 25,000, if not more, Jews have been killed in the name of Zionism. And so if you want to take out the Jewish blood spilled card, I'm happy to do it, because Zionism, the main issue that the Satmarov had about Zionism was not their atheism, not their lack of religion, but rather their bloodshed, their danger to Jewish lives and to lives in general. The biggest victims of Zionism are not the Arabs who decided to call themselves Palestinians all of a sudden just for political reasons, much as I would say, tit for tat, mida keneged mida, measure for measure, of how Jews politically decide to call themselves Israelis. and it says in Deuteronomy 32, you angered me with a non-God, so I angered you with a non-people. I punish you with a non-people, and that's the direct punishment for the Zionist atheism is this farce of Palestinian peoplehood. They're not Palestinians, they're Jordanians and Egyptians, and Israeli Arabs, I guess. They never called themselves Palestinians until 1964. And yet, but that's the punishment to the Israelis for abandoning God. And so if you're going to ask me, obviously it's better that these girls should be Orthodox Jews, even if they're modern Orthodox, even if they're religious Zionists. It's better to be religious Zionist than to be a Christian, even with all the problems with religious Zionism. But it's better to be a Christian than to be a secular atheist Zionist or a secular atheist anti-Zionist, because at least Christianity believes in our Torah, in our Tanakh, believes in basic ideas of morality and ethics, and more likely than not, they're going to vote Republican and be making this country a better place by voting Republican, as opposed to, since the Democratic Party has been taken over by the Sabbatean progressive, which are really regressive, basically communists. And so again, I can't say I'm happy. It's probably a phase, to be honest. She's probably just trying to be, she really going to live the rest of her life as a Christian. Next, she'll probably take a shahada, and then she'll probably be a Buddhist, and then at some point, she'll come back home to Judaism. Now, but instead of the anti-Zionism, maybe we should ask other questions. How do we live? How do we be in the world but not of the world? Obviously, I don't know which church this girl is joining, but most of the evangelical churches have that same idea of being in the world and not of the world. So that's not what's holding this girl back from Torah. I mean, if she's from Naftali Muster's people, Naftali Muster is pushing, teaching evolution and gay studies and all this stuff that a good Christian is not going to be supportive of, thankfully. So I would even say, even if Naftali Muster claims to be Orthodox, better a Christian than a follower of Naftali Muster. Because Naftali Muster's movement is destructive. And damaging. So again, I'm not happy if this, this whole thing is even true. But it's definitely an improvement. It's definitely a step up from where she was until now. If she was with Naftali Muster's crowd, and I don't know anything about this girl. Like, a friend of mine sent this to me because I know another, family from this family, so probably a cousin, a distant cousin. But that being said, Christianity is definitely a major improvement over atheism, secularism, and if someone, and like Rabbi Meza points out, if someone just simply believes Jesus to be the Messiah and doesn't pray to Jesus, doesn't believe him to be God. And they otherwise keep halacha, which it's not like how in the Inquisition times they were worried about Judaizers. They would let them do that, most likely. And the thing, they let her do whatever she wants. It's not the Inquisition. It's not, not all Christians are the same. These are the things, we live in a different world, and this is something the Zionists have been pushing, harping back on old anti-Semitism that's long, long gone. The anti-Semites today they've mostly abandoned Christianity. The biggest anti-Semites are Democrats and pagans. Most of the neo-Nazis today, they're just like, Hitler was really, particularly in spirituality, a major left-winger, a New Ager, and these New Age pagan types have much more issues with anti-Semitism than any Christians do. And a lot of that harkens back to the same problems that we have with Judaism. This is something else I really want to discuss here, is this tribalism that somehow, Judaism has to defend itself as a faith and as a religion, and not just this vague peoplehood. Judaism is a religion that anyone from any race can convert to. But the Zionists would have you believe that it's some sort of an aboriginal peoplehood, very similar to a lot of these white supremacist groups that are obsessed with their racial identity and their lineage. And while yes, bloodlines and lineages do have a certain aspect of importance in Judaism and Jewish law, but remember the story that we told, the Gemara in Yuma, about Shmad and Naphtali were the two greatest rabbis of their generation, and they were the children of converts. They were descendants of Sennacherib, the king of Assyria, who exiled the northern kingdom. And there was a high priest who managed to make it out of the Holy of Holies, which very few of them did in the Second Temple, because so many of them were corrupt, and this one wasn't much better than them. But apparently he was a little bit better. Maybe he just died sometime in the year instead of dying in the temple. Maybe he had some merit that afforded him that. And the people were showing a traditional level of respect to the high priest, not so much for him as a person, but for him as his office, respect to the office of the high priest, which has halachic ramifications. And a group of the people, shmad and Naphtali, were also showing respect to the high priest. And, as they were traveling, a group, as they were following the high priest, a group gathered around shmad and Naphtali to show them respect. And so when the high priest turned to shmad and Naphtali and said, Shalom Alecha, B'nei Ho'amim, peace be unto ye, greetings, ye children of Gentiles. And then their response was, it's better we who are the children of Gentiles, who do the uvda d'Aaron, who act like Aaron, than you, the seed of Aaron, who does not act like Aaron. And so it's not about bloodlines, genealogy, unless you're living up to what the genealogy says, and every ger is a son of Avram Avinu. Because Talmidim Elu Habanim, we are only truly allowed to afford ourselves as children of Abraham when we're living like Abraham. Doesn't mean you have to have a beard and payas, doesn't mean you have to wear a bekisha, doesn't mean you have to wear a black hat, but basics, which also include the basic ideas of hospitality, which Abraham excelled in, chesed, kindness. But still, you have to keep the Sabbath and kosher, at least in a basic way, and Taras Mishpacha, and pray 3 times a day, things like that. Yeah, we're obligated to do these things. You don't have to necessarily say everything that's in the siddur. It's enough to just say what's obligatory. You can even daven tefillas habineinu. It's good enough. You fulfilled your obligation. It's just we should be striving for more. But if you just want to say shmad, havineinu, and the basic brachas and things, you did what you had to do. On tefillin, you can do the whole thing in 10 minutes. It doesn't have to take 45 minutes. But if you have time, it could take 2 hours. Why not? All depends on how your heart and your soul is guiding you on that day. What kind of relationship you want to develop with God. And so if there's anything that drove Yiddish Shmad to Christianity, it's not anti-Zionism, but Zionism. Because Christianity, in a certain sense, exemplifies certain basic values of Judaism in a way that Zionism is the polar opposite of. The ideas of faith over blood. Are really central to authentic Judaism, but blood over faith is central to Zionism. Blood and land, that's what Zionism cares about. And while blood and land do have aspects of religious importance, that's not the be-all and end-all of Judaism. Faith is the number one issue of Judaism. As much as a lot of people might disagree with me on that, and they have good points. And yes, actions speak louder than words. And so we express our faith through our works. But the Gemara in Makos, very well-known Gemara, says that throughout history, different biblical figures were able to summarize the 613 commandments into, not to say that the 613 don't matter and they were abolished, but rather certain commandments embody the other 613, and the other 613 are expressions of those. Until Habakkuk came and said it's all one. Tzaddik b'emunah yichya. The righteous lives by his faith. Which could also be interpreted as that he was justified by his faith will live. That what makes him the tzaddik is his emunah. And so faith is people think Christianity is faith and Judaism is deed. No, Judaism is faith. Christianity is also faith, but Judaism is faith. Everything that we have, all of our deeds, are expressions of our faith. They're not expressions of our nationality, of our culture. Just the opposite. Our nationality, our culture also have to be expressions of our faith. Faith is the first and foremost thing. And if they're not expressions of the faith, they're worthless. Because better is he who is the son of Gentiles, who lives like Aaron, than the son of Aaron, who doesn't live like her. It's not all about blood. It's not all about land. It's about faith. And most likely, seeking something different than she grew up with. And I don't know, I can't speak for her, but then being exposed to secular Zionists like Naftali Muster, who have a wholly different agenda that lacks all the altruism and faith and universalism that Christianity got from our Torah. And just finding more tribalism by the secularists than she had by the ones that the secularists call out for being too tribalistic in the religious community. Who could blame her for going to Christianity? And so, like I said, it's a step up. Hopefully she'll study more and she'll find. And if not, again, she's better off in the church than in the Knesset. At least she's not killing people. At least she's not, at least she looks at the whole world as a potential for godliness, which is central to Hasidic ideology and theology, that the whole world is filled with God. That's a central aspect, of most Jewish ideologies. Certainly in Hasidism, that's a focus. So again, what exactly are we looking at? All right. Thank you for watching. God bless. Please like, share, and subscribe, comment. All the best.